What did you think of Brett Yormark's comments yesterday and what he said on the podium, then in the breakout sessions?
Well, he certainly doesn't lack in confidence. That's for sure. He very, very aggressive. He's a deal maker, and he comes from a enterprise where, if you're not making a deal of some sort, then you're not doing your job. So he's always trying to, I think, strike deals to generate revenue and value for the league. And some of them are probably a little, off the wall, outside the box. But he puts it all out there, and so it was interesting to hear him talk about some of the things they have cooking, and you wonder if they can kind of complete the meal, so to speak, with the naming rights and private equity, and then of course expansion. He's pretty clear that the Big 12 is still open for business, as he says.
Yeah. Well, the ACC is obviously where everybody points to there, and we know Florida State and Clemson won out. So I think most assumed it'd be like that next tier that the Big 12 would be eyeing, but now we're starting to see Florida State and Clemson mentioned at least a little bit. I know you dropped a line in the story about that yesterday. Is that something that can come into the realistic realm of possibilities for the Big 12?
Well, you look at the Florida State and Clemson's options. The first option would probably be to get into the Big Ten or SEC. The second option would be in some way to reform the ACC with a smaller number of teams, where you would be get a financial advantage because you wouldn't split the TV distribution with 18. Maybe you would just split it with 10, so they could reform in a smaller group. In option 3 is to probably join another league, right? Which would obviously be, there's only one other power conference league, and that's the Big 12. So you look at those options, and again, they probably prefer number 1, but I don't know that that's going to happen because the SEC has schools in those states already, in Florida and South Carolina. And the Big Ten, I don't know how interested they are in coming south. I mean, those things might happen, but I think there is at least early conversation between the Big 12 and those schools about the possibility. I don't know that it's anything serious yet, because they do have to get out of the ACC, whether that's through a settlement or a court ruling. So we could be months, if not years, away from something. But that does seem to be one of the possibilities is the Big 12.
Would that involve, would the Big 12 have to, this private equity conversation comes up, right? Would that be hypothetically them using some of that money to help Florida State and Clemson get out?
Yeah, you'd have to, not only would you maybe have to help them get out, but you didn't have to pay them in distribution when they get to the league an amount that is at least close to what the Big Ten and SEC are paying their schools. So the Big 12 gets mid 30s, or maybe just call it 40 million a year per school in distribution. And the SEC and the Big Ten are at more like 70, which that number will go up. So if you do use private equity or whatever other financial means to get a Florida State or a Clemson, is the Big Ten okay, or Big 12 administrators okay with unequal revenue distribution? So would they be okay with paying Florida State and Clemson, $10 to $20 million more a year? And that's a question I don't know the answer to, except to say that would probably be hard to convince them in the room to do that. But if it means adding blue blood football powers that you need, maybe there's a shot.
Yeah, probably gun shy after Texas, right? A lot of people in that room. The other piece too, though, is extending the grant of rights if you're going to be bringing private equity to the table, right? I mean, how high of a hurdle do you think that's going to be to clear?
Yeah, that is a big hurdle, because I think right now the Big 12's TV deal is only 6 more years. So for private equity involvement, those deals are usually 15 years. So you'd have to extend that grant of rights or an agreement to stay together for at least 10 years, certainly, but maybe 15 to 20 years. And in such an unstable environment of college athletics and the realignment conference landscape, I think a lot of administrators are hesitant to agree to any extension of a grant of rights.
Is some of that, like a school like Kansas, for instance, would they look at it and say, we've got elite basketball program, improving football program, maybe we land on the radar there at some point?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, I think the deal with the grant of rights is you don't want to get yourself into a bind where you can't leave or accept some invitation to another league at some point. We're in an environment that's changing so rapidly that you don't want to hem yourself in a lot. So I think that's a huge hurdle in the private equity conversation.
So Joey McGuire told me yesterday he was frustrated the way SEC schools have recruited against him with the revenue sharing aspect of it, because he says, look, they'll tell you they're going to have way more money. We'll say we're going to hit this revenue sharing number at 20 to 22 million, whatever that's going to be, and we're all basically going to be on equal playing fields. How accurate is that, or is it really going to be you can go above and beyond with the collectives and that same type of gap will still exist?
Yeah, I mean, the gap, the NCAA has been fighting for 100 years. It feels like trying to keep boosters out of recruiting. And for 100 years, it really hasn't worked. Boosters are always involved. And now with the advent of NIL, obviously they've been involved more than ever. And despite the settlement and all the protections that it offers, there is certainly some questions on whether it will eliminate the booster involvement. And I think in places like the SEC, where you have a very passionate and large fan base and alumni who have been pretty open to giving for the NIL collectives, I think it's doubtful they're just going to poof go away. So I think they'll stick around to basically subsidize football and men's basketball pay that the university can't do, partly because of Title IX. So if you have $20 million revenue cap and you have to split it close to even, let's say $12 million to men, $8 million to women's athletes, that still leaves you a little lacking. It depends on who you are, but it still leaves you behind a little bit, because that $12 million for men, you might have to spend $2, $3, $4 million on basketball. Well, that leaves you with about $7 million or so for football. Well, Ohio State's football roster's upwards of 12, 13 million.
Yeah.
So it's twice that. So you have to subsidize that. And to do that, it's your collective. And it doesn't mean the collective is taking donations necessarily, just donations to subsidize that. It also means the school, funding the collective through the foundation, basically sending direct funds to the collective to distribute to athletes outside of the school and thus outside of the cap.
So I guess the long and short of it for the Big 12, probably not going to improve their standing or make it any worse, keep it about the same.
I would think so, yeah. I don't know that the revenue sharing will have make a whole lot of an impact in recruiting. I don't see it. I think it'll just continue. There'll just continue to be gaps that continue to widen from as far as within the Power Five, and also obviously between the Power Five and the Power Four and the Group of Five. There'll be a continuous gap widening, I think. So I don't think a ton will change.
Ross, I really appreciate it, man. Enjoy your work. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks.